Ballard, sports media and sports journalist. Hope everyone's doing great. Hey, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. You know what to do here on the channel. Love and appreciate all of you guys. So we're going to do a series of videos this week or however long it takes me. It might take a couple weeks just because of my schedule and everything. But the next couple videos we're going to do, we're going to go through each Power Four conference, the SEC starting today, ACC, Big Ten, and Big 12. Not necessarily in that order. We'll see how I feel about which one I'm going to do next. But we are going to look at what these teams did this year. We're not going to go through every single schedule, every single game, or anything like that, but just kind of our postseason rankings for these teams. And today we're going to start in the SEC. And I'm just going to be honest. Let's just start at the top. This is like based on not who won the conference, but who had the best season overall going into it. Like, did they exceed expectations? Did they meet criteria? Did they like, and I'll just be honest here. I'll start with Texas. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Well, Georgia beat Texas twice. Why are they at two? I'll look at record and then I'll look at playoff run. Now, Texas, in my book, kind of kind of underachieved almost. I mean, I think they kind of did what we expected them to do here in 2024. They made the playoffs. They made it back to the semifinal. Credit to Ohio State, who won the national championship. But Texas was kind of my go-to team this year. I thought maybe going into the season it was going to be a team we didn't expect in the 12-team playoff. But I also figured if it was going to be a favorite, I figured Texas or Georgia or somebody could have won the title. So I credit Texas. I thought they had an amazing season overall. I thought maybe by one game they came up short. I felt like they should have won a semifinal over Ohio State. But again, Ohio State learned from the Michigan loss, got better, and ultimately won the national championship. And I'm not taking that away from them whatsoever. I will say, getting back to the SEC, Texas seemed like the best team this year. Even though Georgia beat them twice, once in the regular season, once in the SEC title game, and who knows if they had met in the playoffs, what would have happened. But I feel like looking at the season as a whole, Texas was that team. They go 13-3. They lose to Georgia. They lose to Georgia. Then they lose to Ohio State. They lost to Georgia twice, one of which was by 15. One was overtime in the SEC championship game, an instant classic, right? Quinn Ewers, amazing season, I thought. He had three games, one of which was against Arizona State. One was against Georgia in the SEC title game, even though they only scored 19 points and took it to overtime. In that game, he had 358 passing yards, which was the highest of that game. The other two games, he played Florida with 333 and Arizona State in the quarterfinal 322. So he had three games where you had 300 plus passing yards. And I don't know if there's a lot of quarterbacks that could say they did that, especially considering the ups and downs and challenges of this year and playing in a league like the SEC with all the defenses. At number two, I do have Georgia. They made the playoffs, didn't make a good run. I felt like they underachieved there a little bit, right? We're looking at just the SEC here. I'm going to say Georgia's number two. They did win the SEC, but if we had to take playoffs into account, Georgia beating Texas twice still made the college football playoff as a top seed, one of the top seeds at least, going into the playoffs, being a champion, but they got knocked out right in the quarterfinal in the Sugar Bowl, and they did not look that good against Notre Dame. They looked good at times this year. I'm not going to say it was all season. They struggled with Kentucky. They convincingly beat Texas that first time I mentioned, convincingly beat teams like Tennessee. They did lose to Alabama, they did lose to Ole Miss. Those are not bad teams to lose to. But Georgia was a top favorite going into this season and yet again fell short. I'm not here to diss on them. I'm not here to take anything away from them. Next up is Tennessee. I could go all day about Georgia, by the way. I really could. But the fact of the matter is, I think Texas overall had a better season, even though they did lose to Georgia twice. I'm not going to take that away from Georgia. But Texas making the playoffs and making a good run at it is better than Georgia, who got knocked out in round 2 in their first game against Notre Dame, even though Notre Dame was special and made the championship and all that. I get it. There's just something stands out to me about Texas right now over Georgia. Up next, another playoff team, and Tennessee, who finished 10-3, losing to Ohio State that first round in Columbus. Then Ole Miss, then Missouri. Again, I'm not going to break down all these teams. These are good teams. If you notice, I kind of did it based on record, which I really do think matters. In the next category, I mean, we have Alabama 6, LSU 7. Those are kind of tied right there. But Alabama did beat LSU this year. Interesting game. I thought, I just, overall, I look at it and I say, Alabama had a rough season. They really did. Now, they had some good wins. Obviously, they beat Georgia this year, and they beat Wisconsin on the road. Beating LSU, I got to put them ahead of LSU. They did struggle with teams like Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Vandy. Now, Tennessee and Vandy were close. I have no idea in my right mind. And by the way, they did lose the ReliaQuest Bowl to Michigan, 19-13, 6-point game. I still can't figure out what went wrong against Oklahoma, and I'm not gonna jump on that train of, well, the referees kinda had it in their back pocket and blah, 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 it was rigged. That should have been a touchdown for Ryan Williams. I agree it should have been a touchdown there, but I still say Alabama got in their own way and stumbled on their own feet. I still say that. Up next is LSU, South Carolina. Those 3 teams with the same record, you can put them in any category, like, in terms of if you did it based on record, which I kinda did that here. But, like, Alabama beat both LSU and South Carolina pretty convincingly against LSU, and then, South Carolina was close. South Carolina was a great team. That was a team that when we looked at 3 lost teams that were 9-3, we had looked at South Carolina and we said, well, could they be a 3 loss team in the playoffs? First off, 3 loss teams are not making the playoffs if you don't win your conference, let alone make it. I'm sorry. Their 4th loss was a close one to Illinois in the Citrus Bowl. They did beat Clemson, number 12. They beat 10 Texas A&M at home. By the way, Clemson was on the road and they won by a field goal, at least in terms of, it was a 3-point game. Missouri was 23. They beat them at home. They lost a close one at Alabama. They lost a close one at home to 16 LSU in week 3. South Carolina had some games that were really close that they lost outside of Ole Miss. That really, if they had won those games, we're looking outside of that Ole Miss loss. Listen, they had a chance. They had a really good chance. South Carolina did to have won 2 of their games that they lost in the regular season. LSU and Bama, both by 3 points. They had a chance there. You're looking at a couple plays away from being 11-1. 11-1. I don't know who's coming back or what's happening for South Carolina next year and Shane Beamer. But he had a good season. Had a great season. They're a couple plays away. They are a player or 2 away from actually being in the playoffs this year. And I would say the same thing about next year's team. Haven't looked at them yet, but we'll see. Florida, 8-5. Florida, 8-5. Okay, 4-4 in SEC play, 8-5 overall. You look at Billy Napier; he kind of turned it around there at the end. People were calling for his head. I mean, they were ready to jump him on the first thing smoking out of Gainesville. They beat Florida State, who didn't, but they won some close games. I mean, LSU, number 9 Ole Miss at the end of the season, then they beat Tulane in their bowl. They lost in overtime to Tennessee. They lost pretty bad to Miami. That was probably their worst loss of the season outside of that Texas game was 49-17 instead of 41-17 against Miami. Other than those 2 games, they look pretty good outside of some scores like 34-20. They still looked okay against Georgia, and I gotta give them props. I really think Lagway is gonna be something special. I thought Mertz was not that good this year, but DJ Lagway came in and lit up the scoreboards. I mean, he had 226 against LSU. He had 133 against Florida State, 180 against Ole Miss. He did all that. He looked really, really good. Florida could possibly be a dangerous team next year, but I'm not ready to say all that. I'm not ready to say it. I'm saying it could happen, but we don't know. It's still too early to tell. But if DJ Lagway's their quarterback, I like their chances at least offensively. Vandy at 10. Uh yeah, why not? Why not? Top 10 team in the SEC, I'd say. Overachieved team of the year. Let's go ahead and put this out. SEC team of the year is Vandy. Vandy was an amazing team this year. They really were. And I know what you're saying. Well, 7-6 isn't really amazing for the SEC. It is when you've been one of the bottom feeders for a while. And it looked like Clark Lee for a while was getting it going. It was going to be slow. It was going to be a process. Diego Pavia comes in at quarterback. Forget anybody else they had out there. Diego Pavia is a stud. Beat Alabama. Played some good games. Um, Went to a bowl game. Won the bowl game. I cannot, like, I say they won their bowl game. What did they actually do here? Let me see. They made a bowl game though for the first time in a couple years. They did win their bowl game against Georgia Tech. That's a great, great year right there. They did lose their last 3 games. I'll say that. They should have, would have, could have beat LSU, and you're looking at 7-5, maybe. But I mean, beat Alabama, beat Auburn, played it close with Texas, played double overtime against Missouri, beat Virginia Tech in overtime to start the season. Vandy had a great year and overachieved in a season of chaos and excellence for college football. They overachieved, and I just got to give them props. I got to put them in my top 10 here, but I put them right at number 10. You see on the list too. I talked Florida. I talked Texas A&M here too. Texas A&M did lose a few games this year. Now, Texas A&M had a lot of great talent. Again, we're not here to try to look at 2025 yet. They did lose that first game to Notre Dame. They lost to South Carolina. They lost to Auburn. They lost to Texas. They lost their bowl game to USC. But I still think they had a pretty good run. They beat Florida. They beat Arkansas on a neutral field. They beat number 9 Missouri, number 8 LSU. They only lost by 10 to number 3 Texas. They kind of had it easy on their schedule. They really did. Connor Wakeman was good. Then Marcel Reed comes in. He lights up the scoreboard quite a bit. Even in games he lost, he had almost 300 passing against Auburn. That took it to 4 overtimes. They lose on the road, on the Plains, 43-41. I could go down the list of all the great talent for Texas A&M, but I do think the future's bright for Mike Elko. I like it. I love it. Want some more of it. Cook it up in the SEC, Mike Elko. You're doing a fantastic job, and I think people need to acknowledge that. I really do. So Texas A&M at 11. Then we get into the bottom of the SEC. Oklahoma beat Alabama. Okay. Okay. They ended the year strong, I thought. Um, I think that Oklahoma in their first year of the SEC, finishing 13 out of 16 is kind of what we expected, I guess you could say. But lost by 10 to Tennessee, lost to Texas, lost to South Carolina, lost to Ole Miss. They lost to good teams. They didn't really lose to anyone bad. Other than I would say going to LSU late in the season, losing by 20 does not look good. They played a close game with Navy in the bowl game, but the regular season in the SEC, their first year, they go to the Plains to beat Auburn. Michael Hawkins looked really good. Then it was Jackson Arnold the rest of the way. Then it looked good against teams like South Carolina or Texas. I think they had 9 points against South Carolina. They had 3 against Texas. They gave up 30 plus to both those teams. Tried to play it close with Ole Miss. Ole Miss pulls away. But they were hungry. They were 5-5 going into the Alabama game. They wanted that bowl game. They said, "You know what? This is our chance." And even though Alabama shot themselves in the foot against the Sooners, they still found a way to beat Jalen Murrow and Kellen DeBoer and all that. They found a way. I credit them with the finish that they had for the season. Even though they did lose to LSU and Navy, they still found some games down the stretch that they were able to compete in. And I credit that. And I think the future's bright for Brent Venables. I don't know, but that's just kind of what I'm expecting. Again, we're finishing it off at the bottom. Mississippi State. I don't really need to get into that. You won 2 games. I like Mississippi State. Love Starkville. Shout out to the fans. I know a few. You know who you are. I'm not going to diss on your team, but you did have a rough year. Kentucky, I don't know if they underachieved. I think Auburn definitely underachieved at 5-7, but they did have a tough stretch of games and tough schedule. I mean, they lost to Vandy too. They were victims of that. They really did have a rough year. Auburn did, and I hope it turns around and gets better for them. They opened with Baylor for 2025. They lost to Cal at home. I don't get that. Peyton Thorne. Okay, I get it. Georgia, Oklahoma, Missouri, Alabama, Vandy. Those are tough teams to lose to. And 2 out of those 6 games I just mentioned, at least 2 of them were close. Due to the fact of it, really, they were at home. But they had a tough road schedule. They really did. I like Keandre Lambert-Smith. He's most likely going pro from what I've heard. Cam Coleman looks great. Jarquez Hunter, Hank Brown, or whoever at quarterback next year. I really think year 3 for Hugh Freeze, having some good games at home like Georgia and Alabama. You don't have to win those yet. Maybe it changes this offseason. I don't know. I don't know what their goals are. You have those games at home next year. Overall, if I had to grade them, I wouldn't give them an F, but I'd probably give them a D or so. A D plus, D minus. It wasn't the worst, but it wasn't the best. I got to put them at 14 here. Again, I don't want to run through all these teams. Mississippi State, we know they were bad. Kentucky underperformed for Mark Stoops. I don't care what you expected this year. I don't care. 4-8's unacceptable for Kentucky. So again, let's run through this list one more time, and we'll get out of here. And my SEC team of the year is Vandy. They shocked me big time this year, big time. Texas, all the way to Missouri in the top 5. You see it here. Georgia, Tennessee, Ole Miss in between. Alabama at 6. LSU, South Carolina, Florida, Vandy, Texas A&M. Oklahoma, Arkansas, Auburn, Kentucky, and Mississippi State. That is a wrap on this video. SEC postseason power rankings 2025. We'll do this for every single conference in the Power Four. Keep an eye out here at Ballard Sports Media. Love you guys. Jesus loves you. God bless.